started a really incredible treatment program in Arizona called the Meadows, but she talks about us all being perfectly imperfect. And I think that just settling into that, accepting that reality and having that grace for both yourself and others helps take away some of the suffering, I think, that is part of the human condition.
Stories are powerful.
Welcome to the Rise, Recover, Live podcast, brought to you by The Phoenix. This is a space where people impacted by substance use can come to share their story of strength and resilience, get open and honest, and inspire hope and build community through shared experience.
We'll be talking to people in our community on their own recovery journey and shine a light on the topic of recovery in all its forms. Maybe you'll hear some of your story in theirs.
Let's show the world that together we rise, recover, and live.
First of all, welcome to the podcast, everybody. This is Rise, Recover, Live, and this is my co-host, the wonderful Liz.
Hey, Bryce. So great to be here. So excited to have our guest here today. Who do we got, Bryce?
Man, nobody special. It's like, no, today we have the reason that the Phoenix exists. The Phoenix is the brainchild of this person. And just in the time that I've been involved with the organization, I've seen so many people affected by this organization. I just came back from DC, the DMV area, and I was out there at the SAMHSA Recovery Summit. And there were people out there from all over the country. And when I told them that I was involved with the Phoenix, they're like, oh, the Phoenix? Oh, we love the Phoenix over here. And oh, we're doing the Phoenix over here. Oh, you know, Scott and Jackie. And it was like, wow, it just feels so cool to see something so impactful spread to so many different lives and impact so many different lives. So needless to say, it is somebody special today. Today we have Scott Strode on the podcast. Welcome, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We are overjoyed with gratitude. I think this is something that we had in mind at the very beginning of the podcast when we created the podcast. Like, okay, what are we going to do for the Scott episode? And just trying to figure out like what would be the best way to bring you on. But before we get into anything crazy, how's your energy today?
Good. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. And I think it's great that you all are, being sort of a vehicle to help folks share their stories. Because I think sometimes we try to kind of package what we think recovery or substance use or whatever looks like. And it's about as different as it is as we are as people, So the experience is different for all of us. So hearing so many different folks tell their story about where they were and how they got here and where they're headed, I think is important work to do.
Yeah. I was, something that stuck out to me at the summit that I just came from was I felt like there were ways that I was just a fly on the wall there. I went to kind of be a sponge and soak things up. And I know that one of my biggest contributions is my story. And so, but I know especially talking to Jackie and, it's a lot of data being thrown around in these rooms, percentages and rates and how things have been affected over the years. And, I can feel like a sort of inadequacy might not be the word, but let me just shut my mouth and let me just listen so that I can learn more. And so something was said that data changes minds and stories change the heart. And I heard that and I was like, yes, that's important. That makes me feel like I have something to contribute. But then somebody else chimed in. It's like, yes, that's important. But also let's add to that stories are data. Stories are data. So when we're looking at the evidence-based practices and who dictates what an evidence-based practice is, it's like, well, the evidence is in the story as well. You hear so many different stories and in so many ways that people's lives have been changed and increased quality of life continuously from different areas of the world and how it happened. That's where the data is. So I think stories are majorly important. And we are definitely blessed to be able to have this platform. And but without going crazy deep into that, I do want to kind of circle back because in the beginning of the conversation, we were getting into perfections and imperfections, right? So what is your view on perfect?
On perfect? Well, it's as I mentioned, I think, the Pia Melody, who started a really incredible treatment program in Arizona called the Meadows, but she talks about us all being perfectly imperfect. And I think that it just settling into that, accepting that reality and having that grace for both yourself and others helps take away some of the suffering. I think that is part of the human condition about how we judge ourselves and what we aspire to be and how we view ourselves and shame or sort of punish ourselves for not living up to that sort of magical thinking about who we could be or who we should be.
And so with that, so I got a couple of things in my mind. One, a big word that has helped me throughout my recovery and what kind of sounds parallel to what it is that you just put on the floor is compassion. Allowing that grace for ourselves to show up exactly as it is that we're showing up today, because that's exactly who we are, and allowing for the process of us having that experience so that we can cultivate the wisdom that is necessary to be who it is that we're going to be. But, just allowing space for us to be who we are. And my follow-up question to that is, so you are Scott Strode, the creator of the Phoenix, right? But every time I've talked to you, and I've talked to CEOs, presidents, and there can be an air of self-importance, arrogance, whatever you want to call it. But every time I've kicked it with you, even the first time, like, it just felt like I was talking to a friend. So my question to you is, how do you view yourself? Because I know a lot of people view Scott Strode in a way like the creator of this thing. But how do you view yourself? How do you see yourself?
Well, I can share a little history, which I think will be helpful, which is, that it was myself and a group of my friends that really started Phoenix. It was all the folks that encouraged the idea along early on. And there were a couple sort of core friends, Jackie Helios, who still works with the Phoenix and was a clinical social worker, and we climbed together. And my friend Ben Court, he was a climber, but he had worked in outdoor experiential education. Dawn Taylor, she was actually a massage therapist I met when I was training for Ironman, but she was in recovery, and we used to talk about this idea of the Phoenix. And I got this sort of small group together at my home in Colorado, and I said, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting this nonprofit, and we're going to call it Phoenix Multisport at the time. And, here's a draft logo, which fortunately I don't think I have anymore because it was really awful. But
you did.
and everybody said, "That's great. You should do that." and that was kind of, then they let me sort of stumble along, but slowly, those early sort of Phoenix staff and Phoenix members started coming along on this journey. And that's where it really gained momentum. And just to kind of, in a long answer, circle back to what you were asking about, I think initially I was actually trying to help other people, because if I was helping people, I felt like I had some worth, right? Mm-hmm. Like my self-esteem wounds were still present, even though I was in recovery. And I had my own Phoenix experience and climbed mountains and cross finish lines and all this stuff in triathlons. But I was still trying to heal myself by feeling like I was of value to others by supporting them. So honestly, my real transformational Phoenix moments came a few years into Phoenix's existence, where I realized, got sort of right-sized a little bit in my own self-esteem wounds, and acknowledged the reality that we're all deserving of love and that we're all of inherent value just by being here on earth and being alive. So
including ourselves.
Yeah.
It's easy to put that out and not point it inward.
Yeah. But I think staying connected to that is one reason I show up the way I do. I also think that this problem is so big, like even everything Phoenix has done up until now, the Phoenix movement, all the volunteers everywhere running Phoenix events, like we're just getting started. Like this is a big challenge ahead of us, and we're losing way too many of our loved ones, and we need to do way more than we're doing today. So I feel like all of us are just leaning into it together to build this thing, and we're still starting Phoenix. Its true potential is much bigger than what we are today.
I know we want to get deeper into the movement and to where it is that we predict that we're going to go, how we want to contribute to the community and your vision as well. And I know, Liz, I feel you pulling at my heart because I got all these questions. So I'm going to take a back seat after this question. But you said that my self-esteem wounds were still present, and then you used the wording, even though I was in recovery. And I think that's indicative of how we can tend to view recovery as like, oh, I'm well now. And it's like, no, recovery is a process. You know, I was at the airport last night and I found myself saying, somebody had called me and she had asked me, like, are you irritated? And I'm like, no, I don't get irritated. and like later on in the night, like I had to massage that and like, no, allow yourself to have this experience. Like irritation is a natural experience when your flight gets delayed 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Now, do people outside of you need to pay for that? Is it anybody's fault? Is there any rights or wrongs? Like that's what we can research when we look into our heart in this moment. But right now you're having this experience. So allow yourself to have this experience. And so with that process, I do want to lean into like, how do you define your personal recovery? What has your personal recovery journey look like? And where do you think you are now?
Yeah. I mean, I think recovery in general can be kind of it can bring a lot of strong points of view and some dogmatic thinking about like what recovery is and needs to be and should be and this and that. And, you know, but if we've hung around each other long enough, I'm going to say at some point that we're all in recovery from something. You know, I believe that. I think that maybe for us that are on this podcast, our coping mechanism became so loud, we had to listen to it with our drug and alcohol use and how we were showing up in the world. But for others, the way they're coping with stuff and their own recovery journey, may be more sort of insidious and harder to identify, and actually sadly might stick with them for most of their life. But I actually think there's something special in what I went through in my addiction, because it got loud enough I had to listen. And then I started listening. And what I realized is that the word recovery actually fits well, I think, because we are continuing to heal and evolve on this path if we're being sort of intentional on how we live and how we interact with others. So, you know, I think early on, just not drinking was like a good first bar to hit, you know, like I was pretty excited about that one. And then starting to show up for friends and loved ones differently, which I wasn't able to do when I was in active addiction. And then starting to show up for myself differently, and then starting to show up for my community differently. And I think it just keeps sort of evolving from there if you're intentionally trying to evolve it. You know, one thing we talk a lot about at Phoenix and is this, we're all in this self-actualization journey. But what I love about self-actualization is it's not like a destination. You don't get there and then you're there. You get there and your gifts and your passions and the way you can contribute evolve also. So you can continue to evolve how you're contributing and stepping into self-actualization. And it's the same way sort of you grow an organization, which is sort of a whole nother topic. But I think that self-actualization is actually a really deep journey. And if we're being thoughtful about how we can contribute to help others, it actually is the best way to ultimately help ourselves too.
So much of that I feel like we've talked about this before on this podcast, and I think it just comes up a lot with any kind of recovery conversation, but it's so much just like leaps of faith and trust, and just, you know, stepping off the ledge and trusting that, you know, the parachute will appear or someone will be there to either catch you or hold your hand and take that dive with you. And I think that's something that I've always really admired about you, Scott, because as a person who I consider myself a leader in different areas of my life. And the hardest part about leading for me is relinquishing control. And I think that's probably not unique to me, especially in the recovery community. I think we all like to be in control, and that's usually what we're reaching for when we're reaching for, whatever substance. But you were able to not only like step into your own recovery, which takes a huge amount of trust in what people are telling you is possible and in yourself and your ability to grow. You were also able to start building something that's going to be that you trusted was going to be the right thing, that was going to help people and speak to people. And then the reason it is as huge as it is and continues to grow is that you looked around and said, all of you who have experienced this thing that I've experienced, I trust you to help me grow it. So like, here's my idea. Take it, add your ideas, and then go find more people to add ideas. And like, you're able to do that in this like way where you not centered yourself. I mean, I almost feel like when we talk about like Scott Strode, founder of the Phoenix, sometimes I feel like I can almost like see you being like, not about me, and which is just such a quality of a great leader. But like, it's not like you've made it so it's about us. Like, you've really created this movement where every single person who signs that membership agreement and attends a class, it's like they are just as critical a part of this as you. And you've made us all feel that way. And that is just a freaking superpower. So I guess my, not really a question, but just speech, as it turns out, is just to see, is that something that was intentional? Like, is that something that like you went out and you're like, I really trust people? Or was it just like, this is what I got to do to survive, I'm going to be of service, and then it just evolved?
I think it was a shift in thinking of Phoenix as more of a movement than an organization. Mm-hmm. And I think that early on, we step into whatever work, if we're sort of thinking entrepreneurially around anything, and as we step into it and we have this doubt of like, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. There's probably people that know better. Maybe I should hire some people who really know what they're doing to work with me, that kind of thing. And what I think can start to happen is that you start to realize that your instincts and where you think an organization should go is actually where it should go, and maybe if the addiction issue in our country was different, we could model ourselves after things that already exist because they would already be addressing it. But the thing is, it keeps getting worse. So I feel like we need some innovation in how we're approaching it. And I think that one thing that's lacking from the sort of the addiction recovery industry, and that's, treatment and detox and even the therapeutic community and all this other stuff is this deep belief in people that they are so much more than what they're experiencing right now in life, that within all of us is this intrinsic strength. And, as I started to have sort of mentors that help me understand that actually Phoenix is more of a movement than it is an organization, and that in a movement, we are catalyzed and inspired by the same sort of fundamental human truth or a belief in that truth. But anyone can take the movement forward. And actually, by listening to all the creativity of everyone within that movement, we can make the movement better and more effective and more impactful. And I think of like kind of Phoenix as this really, substantial tree, and its root system reaches out into all these communities, into all these places, and all these little pockets of nutrients that can be drawn up into this tree to help its canopy reach over and shade more people, who are in need of that. And I think that if we're listening to that root system, what it's telling us, we can evolve the movement to follow it versus like trying to get it to grow where we want it to be and instead listen to where it's taking us.
That was mad poetic. I just want to say that I don't know if people know about Scott's poetry side, but that was poetic. That was a metaphor for you.
I've got an addition to that metaphor that just popped right into my brain when you were saying it. Is I'm picturing this big old tree that we've got branching out across all these different communities. And then you know how like Newton, where the apple dropped on his head and all of a sudden he realized gravity was a thing? Like I feel like that is our tree not only has this root system, but also it's dropping apples on people's heads. Like we're changing the way people are viewing recovery. So we've got this, these roots, we've got all these, it's giving shade, but then we're dropping apples. So, I mean, we really are changing the conversation around recovery, around addiction, around substance use. And is that something that's changed for you? Like, how do you view recovery? Like, how do you see the conversation in the community now? And like, where would you like that to go?
Yeah. I mean, I would, I think that sometimes, being part of the Phoenix movement, like we may believe that those of us that are here today are the movement. Well, actually, we might just be plowing the road for the real movement that's coming behind us, right? Like we're clearing the way, we're getting things out of the way so we can keep it moving forward and changing some mental models about how we approach this issue. And instead of thinking about people being impacted by substance use as the problem, actually seeing inside of every single one of those individuals part of the solution.
My favorite quote of yours. I say that all the time.
Yeah. And also, to be able to interrupt that generational transmission of that pain. Bryce, I just heard that you have a father's group that I might have to pop into sometime as a Phoenix event. Yeah, that would be awesome. Because for me, becoming a dad, it's just crazy to me the life already that my son has and how different it is than the environment I grew up in because I'm in recovery, instead of the active addiction and untreated mental illness that I grew up underneath. So, I think that this movement is going to be expansive and cross over into all sorts of spaces, from criminal justice to treatment to how we even distribute funding at the national level, and internationally, how we're thinking about this. But the beauty is, I think that if we create space for people to think differently how to approach addiction, the creativity that comes out of that will be what the next evolution is.
Yeah, and I think like it's a hotbed of like nutrients in the soil to cultivate that creativity. And I mean, I think I've been a beneficiary of said nutrients, around the podcast and around Sober Dads Club, or around, like, it's just like, I feel like all of my interactions with the organization has been, look, here goes the battery. Let's put it in your back. And what are you excited about? And how can you create these spaces and environments and cultivate new ways to approach engaging people and speaking to people in such a way that gives them a voice and gives them a platform. And I think that same like energy of not like grabbing people like, this is recovery, this is how you solve recovery, this is how you get into it, and this is how you do it, but more so like, look, like, how do you define recovery, and how do you feel that you specifically can contribute, and what are you excited about, and what has turned up for you in the season of your life, and do you know other people that have gone through this process, and can you go grab them, and can you all create space where you feel safe, comfortable? I think that's an approach that maybe I hadn't seen as concentrated before I came around the organization, and I think it's a cool aftershock of some of those, first waves that you all have made when creating this organization. And I think that's pretty cool. I did want to circle back because fatherhood holds a special place in my life. And when we talk about like intergenerational trauma and, like as a Black person, like there's already like stuff that, I didn't even know until I learned about the ACE scores that I could suffer from anxiety from something that I didn't even experience. You know, like I can experience like bodily, biological expressions of some of these different things from something that, you know, my great grandfather went through. And if we go back 2 or 3 generations in my family, like it gets weird, right? So a benefit of my recovery is that, like, in action and in practice, we kind of begin to like heal. So when we heal ourselves, we heal that ripple effect. So when that ripple effect comes, it's coming from experiences I haven't had. But when it gets to us and then we begin to heal it, like we stop the wave. So the generations after us don't necessarily have to pick up some of the things that maybe were innate in our experience or that we were unaware of, because the process of recovery for me has been to bring awareness to certain things that maybe I wouldn't have been aware of had I not had the process and the tools to be aware of them. And so how would you say, as a semi-new father, right? How would you say, and I only say semi-new because how old is your kid? 2, 3?
16 months. No.
Oh yeah, you know. Yeah, you know.
Yeah. That feels new.
Yeah. You're new. My son will be 17 this year. My daughter is 10. And but what is some realizations, some revelations, because our life changes when, like, you know, now we have a kid, you know, now is bigger than us. And now this is the world that I leave behind for the next generation. How has your life and your recovery and your perspective on the way that you move changed since becoming a father?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there's a lot of answers to that question. You know, I think the one that stands out for me is just my purpose of being here on Earth feels very different, you know, because, you know, I feel like in many ways I'm here to support him on his journey now. And my journey obviously is continuing, but maybe prioritized, you know, a little bit differently because, you know, I have more tools to get through the day than he does at his age. And so I got to show up for him and be there for him. And I think it's, you know, really, you know, kind of pressed. I think it's a lot of our stuff we can sort of conceal or protect and sort of hide away or old emotional material, right? Where it doesn't get triggered or activated. But when you have a little one, I think that a lot of that armor is just shed because you're sort of tired and you're trying your best and you're grinding to get things done and just to keep things moving. And so I feel like in some ways, some of the really raw stuff that was deep inside here, you know, has been touched. And some in a really powerful and beautiful way, and others in ways that, you know, things have been hard. You know, it gets hard sometimes because, you know, I just want to continue to show up for him in a way that maybe I didn't have when I was a kid. You know, and it's like, I'm not blaming folks. You know, what you said about ACEs, I think, is a powerful topic because, you know, if you understand adverse childhood experience and you understand that it's bigger than just what's listed on that ACE score, to your point, it's some of these environmental traumas, but also these generational things that are passed just by the way that person shows up in your life now because they experienced some pain before you're even on Earth, you know? But the beauty of understanding that extreme is out there around ACEs and covert trauma and environmental trauma is that we know we can actually create the opposite of that too. Like if that exists, then the opposite of it has to exist as well. And we, because we're part of the Phoenix movement, get to be part of creating that every day, right? Like whether we're volunteering here or work here or whatever, we get to create this as best we can, physically and emotionally safe space for others to show up and maybe shed some of that armor too. And then start to open their hearts in a way that they can find, circling back to how we kick this off. Like find that compassion and love. Sometimes finding that compassion and love for others helps us find it for ourselves. And then that's where the real healing starts.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. I think an interesting experience that I had when I first got here, which is very interesting because, to kind of spin back to the beginning where how we feel because we're in recovery, we can hit these points of like, we got to figure it out. But I think I was on staff with the Phoenix at this point, and it was a little bit more than 90 days where I was like, there really is no catch. There really is no catch. Like, this is just a safe space. But like, for a good 90 days, like I'm looking like, okay, where's the weird stuff? Like,
waiting for the bill to come in the mail. Like, this is how much you owe the Phoenix.
The proverbial other shoe to drop. And I think that's, recovery is the process of having that magnifying glass out. The more we become aware, the more sensitive we are to our experience of some of those things that have been in there that we've been unconscious of because it's just been a part of our experience, because of the environments that maybe we come from, because of what was handed to us, because like we talk about, ACE scores, intergenerational trauma. Like, these are things that like I've just been living. Like, the fish in the water, how's the water? The fish says, what water? I've been here. Like, I don't even know what this is until I jump out of the water and see, oh, there's a whole nother place where I can be fun emotionally. I can have fun, be emotionally and physically safe, and be included and feel accepted, And I think with kids, that because kids don't give a like they can be the catalyst to so many ways that we can look at our process that maybe we wouldn't have done had it not been for somebody else, like with nothing else to do but to poke these buttons. It's like, yo, what is this? And make us look at ourselves. And, I'll share this one experience and then I'll hand it to Liz. But I had this experience that really was like not a paradigm shift, but it was like, I can see like, oh, wow, I've changed. Like, I'm changed, and the experiences that I see are not coming through me. But it was my daughter's birthday. We went to this trampoline park. We were going to the trampoline park, and my son was supposed to go with us. And then last minute, he come out to the car and he like, I'm not going. And I'm like, but I thought you was going, because we was waiting for him to come out to the car. So I'm like, I thought you was going. And he's like, no, I'm not going. I'm like, and I scurried off, right? I scurried off, and then I get to the trampoline park. By the time I got to the trampoline park, which was like 15 minutes away, I'm like, so I called him back and I'm like, look, I apologize for skirting off on you. That was energy and emotion that didn't belong to you. I think I was a bit frustrated because, I really wanted your company. I wanted you to accompany us. I thought you were coming. So I was disappointed. And those emotions, that energy did not belong to you. And I wanted to call you to let you know I love you. And whatever you do today, whatever you had planned, whether you was going to go kick it with this girl or with some friends or something like that. Like, I don't want you to take the energy of my dad is mad that I didn't go with them to this thing into that. I want you to enjoy the rest of your day and know that I support you in however you decide to spend your day today. And then me and the baby went and we jumped in the trampoline park, and then I was sore for like a day because trampoline parks make the body sore, right? But it's those moments in real time that we can kind of like straighten the room so that like the room doesn't get as dirty as it has like through multiple generations. And now we have to like, it's exhausting when you got to pick up piles of clothes in a room. Like, but if all I got to do is just pick up this shirt real quick to make sure that I show up in the way that I desire, I think that's a lot easier. And I think that's what recovery does for us.
I think that's a great story to share. And I think a lot about the, when something lands in that old emotional material, we don't even know sometimes where it landed in there and why it landed in there, but we have that sort of visceral reaction, and that's really hard to change, I think, because it's hard to unimprint that survival response with the same emotional power that it was imprinted on us with, because it's often bigger, sort of negative events that imprinted that. But we can practice, and practice makes us better at it. We can be present, and being present can help us identify when we're in that place. And Wes, just what you shared, to be able to reach back out because, I think that if I played that out a little bit, in my childhood, my dad probably would have, kind of went off like that. And then even if he felt a little ashamed about how he acted, he would actually probably throw a bigger emotional hand grenade back at me, because it was like, then he's like feeling bad about how he's acting, but he directs that back on me, and it can actually get much worse. But for you to just say, hey, I was wrong. That's not what I meant. I want to take a minute and reflect and communicate with you in this way, it begins to change that subconscious emotional response. And I think that, to me, is what Phoenix was in my own recovery story. Was like, I started getting into climbing. I started getting into triathlon. When my head got too like cluttered and loud and difficult to kind of process, I'd go out and be on the cliff with some friends, and just being on the rock climbing would clear my head, or throwing on my running shoes and just be out on the trail running would help me reset, and all of a sudden I started turning to that. Even when my subconscious mind was triggered, I'd turn to that instead of drinking and drugging. And that was a powerful switch, because in the old days, going to drinking and drugging was the best way to cope with that emotional material coming up. And then I realized this is actually a positive way to release some of that energy. And inherent in that, I'm with people, and I'm in my body, and my breath and everything else is like helping me reset. Whereas in the old days, it was very different.
Yeah.
How are you able to do that now? I mean, I so much of what you serve others in so many ways, and now you are a dad, and I know from scheduling this podcast that you are a busy, busy guy. So, recovery years and years in, having built, this organization, paving this movement, being part of a bigger movement even than what we are. How do you feed that recovery now? How do you take care of yourself? How do you tune back into that breath?
Well, I mean, for me, there's a morning Phoenix class that I go to. It's 7:30 a.m. in Boston, and that class is my Phoenix. It's where I get sort of recharged. And I think too, I've learned you can. So my wife, Kate, she teases me because I watch like the dumbest movies ever. She's like, how can somebody who thinks about so many things like all day, all these big ideas, could like go home and watch this really stupid movie? And it's like, I get to shut off my brain and just like stare and not have to do it, engage any cognitive function or anything. And I did learn, having a kid, that you can watch a whole movie 15 minutes at a time. So over the course of like a week, I actually get to watch one. So I do that. And then also just, I think, being with my wife in those little moments, because I think she and I are a support system for each other, and just having those little windows of time, when Magnus is asleep and we get to just sit and be quiet. Sometimes we're not even talking, but we're just present with each other. And honestly, you both know this too, just like interacting with other Phoenix members, because it's just the light and the joy and the just the beauty that's inside of every single person that comes to Phoenix. It reminds you like how much hope is out there, even when things can feel kind of overwhelming.
Yeah. There
is so much hope. Like you said before, this is getting bigger, and the problem is getting worse in a lot of ways. And, more and more people are suffering and reaching for something to help with that suffering. And then often that thing they reached for becomes the problem. And, hence, as is the story of addiction, of substance use. But I think the shift that's happening within the Phoenix, and then also I hear it, we've spoken to people who are part of other organizations, and we've partnered with other organizations. And so often I feel like in the past, it's all been just pulling people out of the river. This is not my metaphor, I'm borrowing from someone else, but we pull people out of the river. just they're drowning. We just keep pulling them out. We've all our resources, everybody, all hands on deck. We got to just get these people out of the river. And at no point are we looking, up the river to see like, why are they falling in? Can we keep them from falling in to begin with, and a lot of this, I mean, just to use kind of probably the wrong word, but like this holistic kind of way of looking at recovery, in that it's not just okay, stop drinking. Whoop, you're fixed. You're good. Okay. Now go pull somebody else out of the river, but like actually having that like constant healing and passing that along to your kids, and, looking at people and being like, there really is more to you than this. And yes, you stopped drinking, but how else can, like, that self-actualization that not only is going to help save people's lives, but also make people better and stronger, and eventually, hopefully, less people are falling into the river to begin with.
That's a beautiful
That's
metaphor.
what you're building.
Beautiful
Thanks.
metaphor. Whether it was yours or not, that was a beautiful metaphor. It's got me thinking.
We're so poetic.
Yeah, that's great.
So before we get up out of here, I know Liz has her question of the day. And this is one of my favorite parts of the podcast, where Liz has to figure out how to ask this question again. So Liz, I'm going to give it to you to ask the question.
I would love to. Yeah, I also want to say that, Scott, I'm just going to say it out loud in public. So we're going to hold you to it. This is not going to be the last time you're on this podcast, because we want to dig more into like your story and more about, just there's so many different ways we could have taken this conversation. And I love that we just kind of let it flow today. So thank you for that. And this question that's always built up bigger than it is, but I just can never remember how to say it, is, if you could look back at previous versions of Scott, you get to decide which version of Scott you want to aim this at. What is a message? What would you say to old Scott? Maybe it's yesterday, maybe it's a decade ago.
I would just it helps me thinking of my son, like a 16-month-old Scott. What would I have said to him, And I think just letting myself know, even with all the chaos and the difficulties and sort of relationship and primary caregiver stuff that I've experienced as a kid, that I was worthy and deserving of love. Even if that wasn't the message I got all the time. And because I think that me not believing that about myself actually is what caused pain for other people, right? Because I was like going through the world trying to fill that hole with stuff external, which ultimately you can't find that externally. And because of that pain rubbed off on other people. And, if I had learned that lesson sooner, maybe there would have been less amends that I needed to make.
Would you change anything?
Would I change anything? I don't think so. I think it's like, I definitely believe that everything that happens to us gets us exactly to where we are. And I think that little small changes could have taken us a very different direction. But, I think I would have probably looked for and been sensitive to moments of awe more, like I think I've had some great experiences in my life, but I wasn't tuned in always to realize I was in one. I was so busy thinking about the one I wanted to get to that looking back, I might have missed some of the joy in the moment that I was actually in at the time.
Thank goodness we have this moment. It's such a good message to say to ourselves right now. I feel like sometimes I look back and say the same thing, and I'm like, oh wait, I could start
do that
now.
right now. Yeah. And like Scott said, like everything plays a role into where we're at now. And so those experiences were necessary for us to have the inclination to bring about presence in this moment, for us to bring ourselves to awareness in this moment. Like we wouldn't even have that pull or that nudge had it not been for those experiences that we can look back and say, oh man, that was a cool experience. I wasn't there as much as I would have liked to have been. So let me go ahead and be here in this experience as much as I know that I can be. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Well, Scott, is there anything that you would like to kind of end us with here? Any message you'd like to give just to the community? Our podcast is still in its infancy, I think is safe to say. If I don't think we said this before, but your voice is in the very intro, so it's cool to have your voice now throughout the entire thing. We kind of snuck that in there. I don't think we even told you that was happening, and then all of a sudden you were in the intro. So thanks for being part of that. But in these early days, knowing that we'll have this conversation, I'm sure, again, is there any kind of message you'd like to give to this podcast community that is rapidly growing?
No, nothing specific. I guess I would say, if you listen to it and it's helpful for you, share it with others.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think sometimes we can feel as if we're alone in things we're experiencing. And when you open that up to your circles of influence and your friends, you realize that actually there's a lot of us out there going through the same stuff. I think that sometimes when you're in recovery or struggling to get into recovery, you can think you're the only person in the room that has a problem. And then you realize there's a lot of folks out there that have the Phoenix shirt on already, or would be happy to pull one on. And so just sharing it with others if it's helped you.
Perfect. Words right out of my mouth. I agree. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you, Bryce, for being the world's best co-host. And thanks, everybody, for being here. Once again, join us every week. And please subscribe. Again, share with a friend if you'd be so kind to leave us a rating and review. That would help people to find the podcast. And catch you next time.
So now you're excited. Bryce, Liz, how do I get involved with the Phoenix? Well, my friend, it is super simple. We actually have an app. Head over to the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, or look in the show notes of this podcast, wherever you're listening to or watching this podcast, and go download the Phoenix app.
The Phoenix app makes it so easy to find classes that are near you, or to access our virtual class schedule where you can hop on from the comfort of your home. You can also join our groups and have a conversation with someone from the Phoenix community from anywhere in the world. Please make sure that you join the podcast group where you can connect with Bryce and I and other listeners. Everything that you need is in the show notes. You can also head to our website at www.thephoenix.org. And maybe while you're there, you click the volunteer tab and get even more involved.